All right, well, it looks like folks are still calling in, but we do have a really packed agenda today, so I do think we should get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's FEMA Region 3 Coffee Break webinar, Discovering Mitigation Alternatives. Today, each of our presenters are going to explore how hazard mitigation planning teams can determine which mitigation actions are best suited to address identified risks, align with community goals, and build capabilities that enable actionable implementation. So here we have our technology tour slide, and this is just going to help us navigate the Zoom platform during this webinar. All participants on the call are currently on mute, and this will help to reduce background noise since there are so many of us on the call. You may use the chat panel to ask questions, and if we have time at the end of the webinar, we will keep the chat open for any additional comments or questions that come through. And should we not get the chance to respond to your question, you can definitely reach out to our presenters via email. Their contact information will be provided at the end of the webinar. When it comes time for our polling question, it should pop up for you to easily answer. But if you're experiencing a lot of technical difficulties using the polling function, you can feel free to just type your response to the poll in the chat. I also wanted to mention that this coffee break webinar is being recorded, and we will talk more about that on the next slide. So as I mentioned, this webinar will be recorded. This recording may be used for future reference or to share with people who could not attend the coffee break. It may also be used otherwise at FEMA's discretion. By attending this webinar, you are agreeing to these conditions. Again, welcome to today's coffee break webinar, Discovering Mitigation Alternatives. We have a really exciting agenda lined up for you all today. So Joshua Norris with FEMA Region 3 will begin by providing an overview of how you can better understand and discover mitigation alternatives. Emma Giardina and Noah Palau will present on Philadelphia's 2022 All Hazard Mitigation Plan, Building Capacity for Plan Implementation. Aubrey Germ with City of Baltimore will tell us all about the city's Community Resiliency Hub program. Josh Schnitzline will provide an overview of DC's flood mitigation and risk management, lessons learned from Flood Smart Homes and the Flood Risk Viewer project. Finally, we will wrap up with relevant resources, announcing future coffee break webinar topics, provide information about how you can receive professional credits by attending this webinar in its entirety, and have a Q&A. So our first presenter and the FEMA lead for this webinar is Joshua Norris. Joshua Norris is a FEMA Region 3 hazard mitigation planner embedded within the Maryland Department of Emergency Management and is FEMA Region 3's lead high hazard potential dam mitigation planner. Joshua works with FEMA Region 3 partners to cultivate community resilience through local and state hazard mitigation planning partnerships, training, and resources. And with that, I will pass it off to Joshua.
Thank you, Alyssa. Hazard mitigation plans fundamentally drive hazard risk reduction. Jurisdictions, states, and tribes develop hazard mitigation plans to identify, prioritize, and implement long-term actions that sustainably reduce assessed hazard risks. To qualify for FEMA mitigation grant funding, the diverse range of actions included within hazard mitigation plans must be informed by jurisdiction-specific vulnerabilities, hazard-specific risks, hazard mitigation priorities, benefit cost considerations, local capabilities, and prioritization criteria established by planning process participants. Mitigation alternatives identification is valuable because it ensures that communities are using their limited resources to advance actions that best address the priorities, hazard risks, and vulnerabilities of greatest concern. There are 4 types of mitigation actions generally identified within hazard mitigation plans. These are local plans and regulations, which are actions that address governmental authorities, policies, and codes that influence land use. Structure and infrastructure, actions which address modifying new or existing structures and/or infrastructure. natural systems protection actions, which minimize damage to, protect, or restore environmental systems. And lastly, education and awareness programs, which are actions that involve citizens, elected officials, property owners, and other whole community partners, and ultimately inform them about how to advance mitigation. Throughout the planning process, plan participants should develop alternative actions based on agreed evaluation criteria. In addition to anticipated overall effectiveness, one option is to use the Stapley action prioritization method, which refers to considering the social, technical, administrative, political, legal, economic, and environmental aspects of proposed actions. So these criteria may be posed as survey questions to mitigation stakeholders during the planning process. For instance, for social, one might ask, is there public buy-in for the proposed action? Technical, is the proposed action technically feasible? Administrative, are sufficient human resources available to manage, monitor, and maintain the action through implementation and once it is completed? Political, is there the political will for the proposed action? Legal, does the jurisdiction or relevant entity have the legal authority to implement the proposed action? Economic, do the action's benefits outweigh its costs? Will the action profoundly protect or impact the economic well-being of a community or multiple communities? Environmental, will the action protect or benefit the natural environment? Will the proposed action adversely impact the natural environment or cultural resources? Here is a clear depiction of how alternative hazard mitigation actions should be developed within hazard mitigation plans. Jurisdiction-specific hazards of concern, vulnerable assets, including population, systems, historic landmarks, and environmental resources, community goals, and progress made on existing mitigation actions should all be analyzed to determine what alternative mitigation actions are most feasible, effective, desired, and beneficial. When developing mitigation action alternatives, make sure to consider how each action accounts for the impacts of climate change, population changes, land use shifts, and community lifelines. The 7 community lifelines shown on this slide are the fundamental services in the community that, when stabilized, enable all other aspects of society to function. In other words, they are an integrated network of assets, services, and capabilities that support a community's recurring needs. For inspiration and guidance developing specific mitigation alternatives, contact your state hazard mitigation officer, consult your previous and/or current hazard mitigation plan, reach out to neighboring communities, and explore the wealth of technical assistance resources available online, such as the resources that will be listed towards the end of this webinar. Keep in mind that annual and post-disaster hazard mitigation plan reviews allow communities to maintain momentum for mitigation action identification and implementation by integrating the latest hazard risk data and local priorities into the plan, refining the plan to sustain political support, highlighting changes to mitigation capabilities, and adding information concerning potential funding sources. With that, I will now introduce our next presenters, Emma Giardina and Noah Palau. Emma is responsible for strategic planning and program management for the City of Philadelphia's Office of Emergency Management's infrastructure program. The infrastructure program's planning portfolio includes utility disruptions, severe weather, damage assessment, and debris management, as well as hazard mitigation planning. Prior to her current position, Emma was OEM's hazard planning coordinator and led the update of Philadelphia's 2022 All Hazard Mitigation Plan. Emma also serves as a response team leader, supporting interagency coordination in the field and in Philadelphia's Emergency Operations Center during large incidents and disasters. As the Hazard Mitigation Planning Coordinator, Noah is responsible for working with a variety of city, state, and federal partners to develop and coordinate a comprehensive hazard mitigation program for the city. NOAA updates and maintains the city's hazard mitigation plan and other hazard-based plans in the infrastructure program. Previously, NOAA worked on bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure planning projects as a transportation planning intern at the City of Philadelphia Office of Transportation, Infrastructure, and Sustainability, abbreviated as OTIS.
Great, thank you so much for having us here today. Today we're going to talk about Philadelphia's 2022 All Hazard Mitigation Plan, more specifically how we're working to build capacity to implement the projects in our plan. I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about what we've done in the past, and then I'll pass it to Noah, who's going to talk about what our plans are for the future and our next steps. So Philadelphia Office of Emergency Management just completed our 5-year plan update in May of 2022. And at the start of this planning process in 2020, when we were trying to develop goals and objectives, we knew that one thing we wanted to focus on was plan implementation and really building the city's capacity to implement the mitigation measures identified in our plan. So when going through our 2017 mitigation actions, we spoke with a lot of our partners, and they identified that funding for project implementation was a big gap, and that continuously came up in our conversations with partners. So we knew that the City of Philadelphia was leaving dollars on the table by not pursuing funding through FEMA's Hazard Mitigation Assistance Program. In the past, we had applied for a handful of different projects, mostly just money to update our hazard mitigation plan. But with the new Building Resilient Infrastructure and Community Program, which was being introduced in 2020, we knew it would be even more important for the city to be well positioned to pursue this funding, which focused on larger scale infrastructure projects. So in coordination with our Mayor's Office of Grants and Recovery, we developed a city application process and a regular schedule of outreach around FEMA are typically the applicants and develop the project ideas and write the application. Expert in BRIC and FMA helps to educate partners on these opportunities, and is also that single point of contact for the city between city sub-applicants and the state. So how do we do this? What steps do we take to set the city up to pursue this type of funding and pursue funding for implementation? So first, I mentioned earlier, partner engagement and education. And this is really a year-long process in Philadelphia. So we host mitigation funding workshops to share information with our hazard mitigation stakeholders on different funding sources. We host one-on-one project scoping workshops and meetings with our partners to talk through potential projects, which ones may be a good fit for which funding sources, and how to make those projects more competitive. We also hot wash with our partners who have applied for grants like BRIC and FMA to figure out what did they learn from the application process that we can then teach our other city partners. And I mentioned that we had just updated our 2022 plan, and through that process, we worked with over 85 different partner agencies. And so we really leveraged those partnerships from that plan update and continued that education and that outreach year long, which helped set us up for success when pursuing these opportunities later on. As I mentioned earlier, the next thing we did is we developed a more coordinated project approval process for BRIC and FMA funding. So as was mentioned earlier, we all know that to be eligible for hazard mitigation assistance, the projects have to be included in the city's all hazard mitigation plan. So to make sure that those projects that were being submitted aligned with the plan, we developed a process where city applicants would submit their project to our City Hazard Mitigation Steering Committee for review prior to submitting a state application. So that allowed the steering committee to review the project, make sure that it was in the plan, make sure it aligns with citywide mitigation goals and objectives, and if it's not in the plan, vote on whether or not it should be added through a plan amendment process. So this process really helped to make sure that the steering committee had a full picture of the applications and the projects being submitted each year so that our highest priority projects were being put forward and moved forward into the state application process. So some factors that we looked at that in determining whether or not a project should move forward and should be included in our plan. A lot of these were discussed in the earlier presentation, but we look at effectiveness, efficiency. Does the project address more than one hazard, or does it address high risk hazards? Does the project reduce risk to critical facilities? And then another thing that we recently started looking at is equity and making sure that the projects we're putting forward are really reducing risk to those populations that we know are more at risk in the city of Philadelphia based on our risk analysis. And then finally, I mentioned that our outreach is year-long. We really have been holding ourselves accountable to annual plan reviews. And by doing this, we're making sure that once a year, we're revisiting those projects and we have an up-to-date list of projects that we can choose from and start looking at as these grant opportunities become available. And our next annual plan review is actually taking place next week, so we're really excited about that. And all of our agencies and organizations who are interested in adding mitigation actions to the plan through a plan amendment process are encouraged to participate in this annual review process, so we're always up to date. As I mentioned earlier, the process of engaging our partners around plan implementation is really a year-long process. So during the 2022 plan update, we engaged over 85 different agencies and organizations, and we really continue engagement with those partners year-long through newsletters, training sessions, one-on-one meetings, and really leverage those lasting relationships as we conduct outreach about hazard mitigation assistance each year. So each winter, we host an annual review. Each spring and summer, we're conducting outreach on different funding opportunities through one-on-one project scoping meetings. And each fall, we're going through that steering committee application process, plan amendment for BRIC and FMA, and then beginning that state application process. This year-long engagement with our mitigation partners and development of the city application process has proven really successful. So since 2020, when we developed this, we've had 2 BRIC applications approved worth $350,000. We had 1 BRIC technical assistance project approved and underway. And the BRIC technical assistance has also really been successful because it's connected us to additional resources and information to support the development of future applications. We have 1 BRIC national competition project worth $24 million that was identified for further review. And we have 4 applications that we submitted in 2022 pending decisions. And, even though there were several applications we submitted that didn't receive funding, the city learned an incredible amount through the process of submitting those applications. So, for example, the $24 million project that was identified for further review was actually first submitted in an earlier BRIC cycle. But we were able to use feedback from that application process to really improve it and submit it the following year, and it was definitely more successful. So while OEM helps to coordinate our approach towards pursuing this funding, I just want to recognize too that our incredible partners at Water Department, Office of Sustainability, our steering committee, those are the people who are really doing the work in terms of identifying the projects and writing the grant applications and getting this funding. They put a lot of work into those applications. And next, I'm going to pass it to Noah, who's going to talk a little bit about what our plans are for the future to really encourage project implementation beyond just pursuing BRIC and FMA funding.
Mm-hmm. And so with the kind of the taking the feedback and using it to improve our projects every year, we're really trying to make sure that we identify areas for growth with every project that we push forward to these different funding sources, and making sure that our partners are continually engaged and really looking to kind of source different things for their projects. One of these ideas is really investigating other funding mechanisms for project implementation. We know that BRIC and FMA do exist, but we're really pushing for other types of funding from either the state or public-private partnerships that would match better with some of these projects that may not fit directly under that BRIC or FMA umbrella. And really kind of creating a menu of options for these partners to get funding for their projects, as well as improving the prioritization process using ideas such as Stapley that was mentioned earlier in the presentation, and really making sure that we address barriers that partners have to finding these funding sources and implementing these projects. For example, one of our main issues that partners have mentioned is benefit cost analysis, and we're looking at providing a training for that so that partners can kind of do that work in-house without having to hire a contractor that may take additional time and resources that some of our partners may not have. So really all the time it's looking for different areas that we can grow and improve our processes.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Noah. Now, I will introduce our next presenter, Aubrey Gurm. Aubrey is the Climate and Resilience Planner for Baltimore's Office of Sustainability. She is responsible for overseeing the city's Hazard Mitigation Plan, Climate Action Plan, and Community Resiliency Hub program. She holds a master's degree in urban planning from Harvard University and a BS in environmental health sciences from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill.
Thank you, Joshua. Hello, everybody. I'm really thrilled to be here today to talk about Baltimore's Community Resiliency Hub program. So first off, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the concept of a resiliency hub and what they're meant to be for communities. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the term itself. It's kind of been a buzzword for a number of years now, but to different communities and different jurisdictions, it can mean different things and present itself in different ways. So I do want to mention that there's a lot of nuance with this, and that I will be mostly talking about Baltimore's specific program and how it operates, which might not look like other resiliency hubs or resiliency hub programs that you might be aware of. So just a grounding kind of definition around a resiliency hub. So they tend to be spaces for vulnerable populations in times of emergency. And it's a community serving facility that can be a community-based facility, community org, a city-owned and operated site like a library or a rec center or a school. It can kind of look and feel different ways, but overall, it's a facility that is enhanced to provide trusted communications to the community, a safe space to gather, provide access to essential resources, either on site or through distribution, as well as ideally backup power as a backup power source for the community, because we know power outages are a significant risk in larger scale disasters. So the graphic on the right is just something that a wonderful creative organization called Parachute put together for an article that they wrote on profiling one of Baltimore's Resiliency Hub partners. And it just kind of really emphasizes a bit about how Baltimore's program works, where, it's really about raising community awareness, trust, and familiarity before emergencies happen, so that if and when something does happen, there's improved provision of resources and response efforts that's kind of more hand in hand with the community and the city. And overall, the goal is to provide in blue skies times everyday social connection and value, so that if and when things happen, there's better coordination and collaboration. Next slide. So we have a network here in Baltimore of a number of community-based organizations that are part of this program. So our model works with frontline service-based community orgs, often faith-based or faith-inspired community organizations that have strong leadership. They're located in Baltimore's most climate vulnerable neighborhoods. A lot of the vulnerability that we look at was identified in Baltimore's hazard mitigation plan. So that's a good foundation for better understanding what communities in Baltimore are most at risk. These organizations want to and desire to serve as a safe space in times of crisis. Many of them already do. They're well connected and well positioned to reach those who are most at risk. And this is so critical because so I'm on the city side, but recognizing that community partners and community-based organizations are often way better positioned to reach those who are most at risk than city entities. And these organizations desire to and can distribute resources and provide access to essential items like drinking water, food, phone charging, and storage for medicine. The other essence of the program is that the organizations that we work with, they desire to partner with the city to be connected to additional resources, to be kind of a voice for elevating community concerns, and that they also want to take part in meetings and training and be part of this kind of cohort of organizations all working towards improving resiliency in their communities. Hubs also desire to spread awareness and be a voice for climate risk and preparedness. We recognize that community-based organizations that people rely on and seek regular resource support daily often have built way better trust, than a lot of city entities. And so hubs are seen as trusted messengers and can really be that voice for bringing awareness to climate risks that exist in communities that are struggling day to day and may not be thinking about potential future risk, but integrating and showing how all of these risks and community burdens are inextricably linked is really a critical piece to successful resiliency hub program. So one of the things that we ask when identifying partners to work with in this program is which organizations are already doing this kind of work. Every city, every community has those frontline community orgs that are working with vulnerable individuals every day and building that trust and building that rapport and those connections. So how can we tap into existing community networks, in this work to build stronger community resiliency? We also believe that organizations do not need to have all the bells and whistles to be considered a resiliency hub. You can see in the photos on the bottom there, those are some photos of what Baltimore's resiliency hub partners look like. That's their buildings, their churches, their community orgs. They're operating in old school buildings. These are organizations that have a building and a site, whatever it might look like, but their location and the fact that they exist in highly vulnerable communities is kind of at the core of the program. Next slide. So the foundation for this program is in Baltimore's hazard mitigation plan. It is an implementation action of the plan. So we have a number of actions that are listed in the plan that kind of touch on resiliency hubs and also battery backup power and solar power expansion, things like that. So here's just a few examples of how the resiliency hub program is embedded in our 2018 hazard mitigation plan. And Baltimore is in the process of updating its 2023 hazard mitigation plan as well, and will be integrating more resiliency hub actions in ours as well. And the state of Maryland also has an action around resiliency hubs as well. So it creates really nice plan alignment between our jurisdictional plan and the state's plan. Next slide. So Baltimore's natural hazard risk profile includes flooding, coastal hazards, precipitation variability, wind, extreme heat, and land events. So far, our hazard mitigation plan is really focused on natural hazards, but in this update, we're going to be expanding to human-made hazards and other events. because we've seen a lot happen in the last 5 years to really necessitate this change. So we are in an era of compounding crises, as we're all well aware. And so we really need an all hazards approach to building community resiliency. And so that's kind of the lens through which the Resiliency Hub program is growing and expanding. Next slide. So the components of our program include grant funded or in-kind city support for high quality emergency supplies for each of the hub partner organizations. This often comes through grants and through the Office of Sustainability, which I'm a part of, and our Office of Emergency Management. We have supported solar power and battery backup, both feasibility studies and installations for many of our community resiliency partners. So far, we've leaned on state grants and some solar engineers that we work with on the project, as well as we have a FEMA HMGP grant application that is under FEMA review right now. We're really hopeful. We'll see. And so this could be a really great opportunity for rapidly expanding solar power and battery backup component of the program. We also support energy efficiency upgrades to the buildings for the community partners through state-funded grants and nonprofit partnership and local foundation funding. Next slide. We also put together preparedness training and workshop opportunities for the partners in the program. We've done things like asset mapping, scenario planning, continuity of operations planning, et cetera. This is often in partnership with the Office of Emergency Management and the city's health department. And we've also sometimes received grant funding to be able to have custom trainings just for the resiliency of partners. We also really, the core of the program in all scales and types of emergencies is focused communication. So it's really that bridging that city community connection where when emergencies occur and the city is rapidly trying to figure out where to deploy resources, having the hubs as partners and willing and able partners is so critical to getting the resources out to those who need them most in a very quick and efficient way. So this is a great way for more resources to come directly to the most vulnerable communities. We also provide education support and outreach support, things like extreme heat information, extreme cold, flooding, things like that. All that information we share with our partners for them to share out with their communities. And so we also have provided grant funding and technical support for the hub. So especially in the pandemic, for example, I was helping provide technical support for the hub partners to keep their doors open and keep resources flowing for the evolving needs of their communities, for food, for PPE, for COVID testing and vaccination, partnerships. So that's something that's really critical, especially when working with community partners, is that technical support and access to additional funding. We also support frequent hub partner meetings. So far, they're bi-monthly, but in the core of the pandemic, they were monthly to provide that line of communication for peer-to-peer learning and information sharing and accurate information sharing, which is so critical as evolving needs and information occur in emergencies. Next slide. So right now we have 17 community resiliency hub partners and the program is actively growing. The map on the right just kind of shows which of our sites have solar and storage, which ones have funding to receive solar and storage. And that's just kind of an interesting snapshot of where things are. Next slide. So some of the outcomes of the program, I mentioned the solar and storage piece. Here's an example of a transformation of one of our community resiliency partners rooftops. They're located in South Baltimore in the Brooklyn neighborhood. You can see the before, during, and kind of after. The funding we had helped support a roof replacement as well as the installation of the solar panels and the battery system. Next slide. Some other outcomes of this program and partnership was an improved COVID-19 response. The community resiliency partners were absolutely amazing at serving as critical food distribution sites, COVID testing sites, vaccination clinics, et cetera. They were adaptable and scalable. They reached some of the hardest to reach populations in the city. So they were really essential connections for our health department as they were trying to expand vaccination and testing access throughout the city. They have, a lot of them have impressive volunteer networks. And again, as non-government led entities, but government supported, they are way more trusted in the distribution of resources and sharing of information. They supported water and box fan distributions during Code Red season, facilitated PPE donations and distributions, and also a lot of them were willing and able and desired to partner with the National Guard when that was a critical piece to the response at the beginning of the pandemic. Next slide. So overall program value, I won't read all of these, it'll take me a little too long, but just want to say that there's countless value to this program and the partnership that comes with it. So just overall, it enhances the capacity and adaptability of community organizations to provide services and continuity of services, provides focused support, investment, and resource delivery, helps the city better respond to evolving needs of the community. And I think one of the biggest things too here is that it honors the fact that faith and service-based organizations are truly community anchors and pillars of strength and trust. And so the city, and jurisdictions and states can acknowledge that and support that, but not lead that. I think that's just a way to fill the gaps in some of generally emergency preparedness and response efforts in a way that is way more collaborative and letting it be a really community-driven process. Next slide. And that is all for me. Looking forward to, I saw some questions pop up and I'll answer those at the end. So thank you all so much.
So here we have our first polling question. I am going to launch the poll. Hopefully folks are able to respond. So we're just asking, what types of mitigation projects have you worked on before? And I believe you should be able to select multiple responses. So we have stormwater management, nature-based solutions and green infrastructure, acquisition, elevation, generators, community-based resiliency projects, public outreach. Maybe you haven't worked on a mitigation project in the past, and that's totally fine. You can still let us know. Or maybe you have worked on one that is not listed here. And if so, you can feel free to put that in the chat. Just a reminder that some folks are saying the poll disappeared. I did not end the poll. So I'm not sure why that happened, but yep, feel free to put your responses in the chat if maybe the poll disappeared for you. And just remember that responding to this polling question is necessary in order to obtain professional accreditation. So yeah. Joshua, it looks like a lot of folks have worked on stormwater management and public outreach projects.
Excellent. Thank you for your feedback.
So maybe we'll just let folks kind of continue to respond as we move on.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Aubrey. We're going to now introduce our next presenter, Josh Schnitzline. Joshua D. Schnitzline, CFM, is an experienced floodplain manager and emergency preparedness analyst. He has managed various projects, secured grants, and led disaster response efforts for the DC Department of Energy and Environment, Lycoming County Department of Planning and Community Development, and the United States Attorney's Office. He also served as a medical sergeant in the Army National Guard.
Hi, thanks, Josh. How's everybody doing today? Beautiful Wednesday. Yeah, so thank you for the introduction. I want to talk a little bit about, I was going to talk mainly about one project, but I want to talk a little bit about what it's like to be the NFIP coordinator in DC, which is a city-state. Because I guess there's a different perspective and challenges and uniqueness there, being essentially a city and a state and functioning within the NFIP. So just wanted to talk a little bit about what those challenges look like and some of the projects we're working on. I guess I'll say next slide. So I'm not going to go over all of these projects, but if people are interested, certainly can. The one I'm not going to go over is the Blue-Green infrastructure, which we have about $20 million from BRIC to work on. But that's a really exciting project because we're looking at how do you floodable parks and that sort of thing. So you can see here we have a flooding history in DC. So DC has a long history of flooding, but the problem is we don't have many RL or SLL properties, and we also don't have a lot of, in IA or PA assistance. And so it's a challenge when you get big floods, but they're isolated because they're only 70 square miles. So let me get my dog to talk. I was distracted. But next slide. So we have river flooding in DC. This is around the tidal basin there. The berry blossoms are blooming. We have the old canal. DC is quite literally a swamp if you look at the topography. This is from 1936. Next slide. There's another example of some of the river flooding. Next slide. So we have river flooding and we have coastal flooding from the Potomac and Anacostia rivers, and tidal flooding. But then we also have interior flooding, which is a big thing to tackle, which is unique to cities in particular, Philadelphia, Baltimore, DC. This is an example of some interior flooding that occurred through stormwater and those sort of things. So this is in the metro system. Next slide. This was in 2020. I took these photos. I used to live right there on the mall, and I was out there in the floodwater. But so just showing you the types of flooding you get in DC. This was also sort of an interior flood event, a cloudburst, if you will. A lot of intense flooding in isolated locations, but not, a city of Houston or an Ellicott City style in mass flood. Next slide. Arthur, stop eating that. My dog's eating that. This is an example of residential flooding. Again, this did not qualify, would not have qualified for HUD or HMDP assistance. And so, I think many cities in the country deal with this. Well, what do you do? People obviously have flood insurance, but some people didn't. And we also don't have that precedent where we have a lot of homes that are elevated. So it's kind of a conundrum to deal with. Next slide. This was an owner of a district dog, which is like a pet grooming service. And he tweeted the mayor, WTF. And you can see it got about 300,000 views. So this is another example of interior flooding that was sort of through the sewer storm system. So, we have some built up flooding issues in DC and not a lot of precedent for mitigation or, those type of grants that would qualify. And so the question is, what do you do? So next slide. Well, I think it's really important. I think every state should have a flood risk management plan outside of the comp plan, outside of the hazard mitigation plan. Really, to evangelize, I guess that would be my suggestion. Every single person develop their own flood risk management plan. If you want to append it to the hazard plan, fine. But I think it should be whoever the NFIP coordinator is or floodplain manager should have their own independent plan. And so we created that in DC, and you can see equity, interior flooding, flood protection. We have these different metrics in place. And on the right side, and so that way we have an action plan, so we can take a break in the CAP and the CPP grants and whatnot, and have projects associated with that. And personally, I think the hazard mitigation plan doesn't do the best job of highlighting that from a flood risk management stance. So to tackle some of these issues, we created a flood risk management plan, and that might be unique to DC. Because we don't have counties or municipalities, right? We have other agencies through Silver Jackets, and we have community-based organizations. That's pretty much it in terms of our output. So this is the floodplain on the right, in the blue there. You can see around the National Mall, we have the Anacostia and Potomac Rivers. Next slide. But you can see here the spots in green, that 2020 flood that I showed in the residential area as well in the National Mall. These are the calls that our emergency management agency got. So you can see that, a lot of the flooding issues were not in the floodplain, right? A lot of them are, but a lot of them aren't due to that interior flooding. We used to call it urban flooding, but I guess that's interior is the more appropriate term now. When I say that word, I think concrete flooding and a lot of pavement. And so what do you do about that? The majority of the calls are coming outside the floodplain. So next slide. So we worked with a UPenn, Carolyn Kuski, when she used to work there, and Len Shabman, just to look at like the flood factor distribution. You can see, based on the map on the left, that flooding is everywhere in the district. It's not just the floodplain. Right? So again, another challenging problem given the pavement issue, given how unique DC is. Another issue is how do you do outreach, right? Like you don't just have a foggy bottom, floodplain administrator. You have a ward, you have people that are staff, but you don't, it's very difficult to do that outreach. So you have to be creative. Next slide. So one of the things we were looking at too, rather than just having the NFIP, we'll still have the NFIP obviously, but as a supplement, parametric microinsurance, which is a trigger-based insurance through our captive, which we do for all medical liability right now in the district. But you can use the captive in the district, and other cities can too. Basically, if the stream gauge hits a certain level, you get an automatic payout to residents. And so it's a good alternative to the NFIP, and it would make for a good PhD. Next slide. So given all of this, we created a task force through the mayor. I guess if someone tweets the mayor, cuss words like that, it gets noticed. So we have all these flooding issues, and we've been doing our outreach and we have projects, but we decided outside of the Silver Jackets that was important that we had all the different agencies working together. So we did action plans through a task force, and we came up with great projects. So like CRS is one of those things that the district would never do, right? But through the task force now we're considering. So really good stuff there. Next slide. I'll try to go a little faster. So the big thing I wanted to talk about today is, what do you do when you don't have a history of HMDP or CBDDR grants? You don't have a lot of SRL or RL properties through FMA. BRIC, really, you can't really use BRIC for, we got the BCA issue and all that for mitigation. So we created a Flood Smart Homes program. Next slide. Basically, we have phase one through the CAP grant. We have 2 open CAP grants, but they're all for the 63,000. But so we hired Dewberry, and they're going to be doing a BCA, an elevation certificate, and an assessment of the property and all the different levels of mitigation that could potentially go into that property. And that'll be about $3,500 per property, but we have about 100 people signed up in response to these recent floods. And right now, we just closed a RFA for $2.5 million of local funds through that mayor's task force to actually do the installations themselves. And what's nice about this is that, yes, we're using FEMA funds for the CAP grant, but that $2.5 million is completely our money. And so we would love to utilize FEMA money eventually, or HUD money. But right now, we kind of get to establish that precedent and have some elevations and mitigation examples in place for the community. And then hopefully, we got from GRIP $250,000 to do more assessments as well. So we're really excited about this. If a flood does happen, we're going to be caught with our pants down, a massive flood. So this is to prevent that. Next slide. I'll just talk briefly about our high watermarks. Next slide. This is the CAP grant. We did 3. Next slide. This is the district work. We created a public-private partnership with them, and we hired an artist. And this has been massively successful. I got $4,000 for the CAP grant this year. I've been talking to Butch about, imagine, if you will, there being water right there, right behind Jesse's Seafood. Imagine a massive, I'm talking a massive rubber ducky. I mean, I know there's plastic in the water, but I'm thinking on Flood Week of doing like a media campaign around that to complement the high water mark. So that was kind of cool to get $4 grand from the CAP grant for that. But this is really neat, right? We have Agnes in there. We had a couple of floods. And it was only about 30 grand for this project. Next slide. We got a really good placard there, FEMA approved, and a website. Next slide. And I'll finish up here. I just want to talk about our flood risk view too. It's mobile friendly, it's very snappy. It's all brand new design. We have flood story mapper. So I kind of created one here from the archives and flooded, but as a resident, you can put an image up and you can put in a narrative. And then you can also have that geolocated. And then it also asks you questions about flood insurance and 3 feet of flooding is equal to so-and-so. So that's really exciting. And then we also have a social media mapping. So anytime somebody tweets out anything about flooding or FEMA or anything like that in the district, it maps on to the flood risk view. So we can try to capture, we don't always capture everyone in the flood. So that's exciting. Next slide. Depth grids. I think everyone in the nation should have depth grids. I mean, who really cares if you can see the floodplain? You want to know the variation in the floodplain. We're also doing an interior flood model with AECOM for about $7 million. And the reason is because basically of all that interior flooding, the floodplain is not adequate. So we're going to have that interior flooding map as well. And we'll be able to know the depth of flooding in those other areas I showed. Next slide. We integrated depth damage function through HAZUS. So this is in the floodplain. If you click on a property, $400,000 assessment, it's going to spit you out about $170,000 of loss. And you can do this for areas in the polygon analysis and also for the whole district. So I really don't think there's any excuse why. I think every single state, every single community should have this in their floodplain flood risk viewers. I mean, it really is helpful for developers. And like, I like what Maryland's doing with their elevation certificate mapper, but this is really exciting. And I keep showcasing this, but if anyone else has done this, I'd love to talk to them. I think we're one of the first areas to do this. Next slide, I'll hurry up and finish up. Forecast, obviously, so you can do the HAZUS with the forecast for the next day, so you can see what the damage will be, and that's pretty standard. Next slide. I mentioned the social media crawler. Next slide. The final thing we worked on too, since the district is unique in that I can't just go to a county or go to a municipality, hey, Georgetown, township, right? That doesn't exist. And so we kept doing these presentations for flooding and the NFIP, projects we were working on, Blue Green Infrastructure, our Watts Branch non-structural study. So we used the CTP grant as an equity project to do outreach modules, professionally narrated in Spanish and English. And I think they were really successful. And so they're on the website if you want to look at them. And that feeds into our Flood Week as well. I think that's it. But we have a lot of other projects we're working on too. But the thing I think to point out is I wanted to showcase that, I guess, because DC is so different, but we do have the benefit that we don't have 50 municipalities doing updates on their flood map. So as a result of that, we can do special projects through the CAP or CTP grant or through BRIC. We can really hit on that advanced assistance money. But that also requires FEMA to kind of play ball with us too, right, and recognize that, which they have, and we're very grateful for that partnership. So, but I think the big thing is that Flood Smart Homes project, doing that proactive mitigation in the district to develop that. So those are just some of the projects that we've been working on. I also think that interior flood model is going to look really exciting. And, many of you probably know Pat Mono, who works for Atkins now. He was the floodplain manager for 10 years, and he really helped set a lot of this up. And so recently we've been trying to do some implementation and create those plans. But I also would really stress that I really think strongly that every single state, at least, or city needs their own independent floodplain management plan. And if they want to append it to the comp plan or the hazard plan, fine. But I think it should exist independent in their agency so they can pull projects. At least for the district, we had to be, because again, we're kind of a city state, right? So we do it all. But that was really successful. So, that's all I have. But thank you. I didn't mean to go over.
Great. Thank you, Josh. As I mentioned previously, here are a few relevant mitigation resources that can be referenced to help communities discover which action alternatives should be integrated into their hazard mitigation plans. All Coffee Break webinars have been planned for the 2023 calendar year. Please sign up for them on our official Coffee Break Eventbrite page, which is included on the next slide. So in addition to signing up for upcoming Coffee Break webinars, consider subscribing to the FEMA Region 3 Resilience Report newsletter. And this presentation will be shared following the webinar so that everyone will have access to these links. I did see a few of those questions in the chat, and thank you for responding accordingly, Alyssa. So don't forget, you may be eligible for professional credit for attending today's presentation and participating in the poll. So you could qualify for ASFPM or AICP credit. Thank you for joining us. In case you would like to connect with the presenters today, our contact information is depicted on this slide. I'll turn it to you, Alyssa.
Thanks, Joshua. And I know we're running up to our time of 12 p.m. Eastern time, but do we have a couple minutes to maybe respond to some folks' questions in the chat?
That works for me. How about my co-presenters? Does that sound good for you?
Works for me.
Sounds good.
I'll just maybe start from the beginning. So Emma and Noah, I think this one's for you. How is research from other federal agencies and academic institutions incorporated into advice for mitigation assistance?
Sure. So in our project scoping meetings, when we're having conversations about mitigation assistance, we really encourage our partners to leverage any and all tools that are available to them as they're developing their applications. So that includes the risk assessments in our hazard mitigation plans, any data or expertise available from all the higher education institutions that we have in the city. And we also try and share that information when we come across it to our partners in all of those forums I had discussed previously, including the newsletters, so that they're aware of all the tools and resources that are available to them.
Great, thanks. And we have another one. This attendee said, great presentation. What proportion of the projects were conceived from scratch? Are there any restrictions already existing in project proposals, perhaps submitted in previous cycles, being included with or without modification?
Sure. Those are all good points. I don't have exact numbers as to how many were conceived from scratch. I will say that one thing we look at with partners when a partner reaches out and said, "Hey, we're interested in hazard mitigation assistance funding," is how shovel ready or pencil ready is that project when it's proposed. Timeline is so important. So we discussed that in our project meetings to make sure that projects are ready to go. There's been enough data and research before we're putting that project forward. And also, the timeline for implementation is flexible enough to match when we receive the grant funding as a city as well. And there was a second part to that question around, are there any restrictions? You had mentioned, I think, if the project was already submitted in previous years. We definitely think about that as a steering committee when we're trying to prioritize those projects. I will say that I mentioned earlier, just because a project was unsuccessful in a prior grant cycle doesn't mean that we didn't learn from that and be able to improve that project and then resubmit it so it's more successful. So that's one thing I would just keep in mind.
Awesome, thank you. We have a question for Aubrey. How are the Baltimore community resiliency hubs incorporated into the Baltimore land use or Baltimore master plan?
Yeah, so the Community Resiliency Hub program has been around for 7 years now, and the last master plan for the city was developed quite a while before that. And so we actually have a comprehensive plan for the city being updated right now. And we are, trying to align priorities as much as possible, especially around resilience and hazard mitigation in the land use plan. So it is, being identified as something to be expanded in the comprehensive plan for the city. But for the most part, the Resiliency Hub action item kind of in our planning efforts is really in the hazard mitigation plan, our climate action plan, and our city sustainability plan, the overarching sustainability strategy for the city.
Awesome, thank you. And we have another question just about, the hub network in general, and if it has significant changes in maybe in other cities that maybe aren't coastal or near the coast. They say, for example, Baltimore and Pittsburgh have very different climate risks and hazards. Does that alter the overall scope?
Well, I can mostly only speak for Baltimore's program. I'm not sure how. I know Pittsburgh has been working on developing resiliency hubs in their own way, but I think overall the core function of a resiliency hub, no matter kind of where you are, is the same, but what hazards they're expected or desire to respond to is based on location and at the discretion of the organization, at least in working with community partners. If your resiliency hub model is working with city-owned and operated sites like schools, rec centers, community centers, things like that, then I can imagine, there might be like certain higher expectations for response that's more integrated with the city's formal response structures, whereas Baltimore's model is really focused on supporting existing community response networks that, maybe seem less formal, but are still really, really impactful and helpful, and like figuring out how to work more collaboratively. So I think in essence, if that kind of model is replicated elsewhere, I think the core of what it's about is the same and can be the same in many places, is my opinion, even though it might look different in different areas of the country or the world.
Great. And then maybe we'll just do one more and then we'll move on to some of Josh's questions. So in addition to backup power, has the city considered assisting hubs with indoor air quality measures like air filtration or UVC to support continuity of operations during pandemic events?
So one of the other support elements of the program is connecting these organizations with energy efficiency upgrades to their buildings, mostly building envelope scale, but that is, kind of embedded in that. But specifically focusing on indoor air quality, no, that has not been the case. But I do believe, there is room to expand into that with the right kinds of resources. Overall, I think the energy efficiency work, is linked to that.
Great. Just looking for some more questions. Thank you so much, Aubrey. I think, we are a couple minutes over time, so I really did my best to try to address a lot of questions. Josh, you have some maybe longer multi-response questions, and so I will definitely gather all of these and send them to our presenters so that they can connect with those who have asked these questions. So I appreciate everyone's participation and asking really good questions and keeping the conversation going. Joshua, did you have any final thoughts?
Oh, you did a great job, Alyssa. Thank you all for your time, and thank you for our wonderful presenters. You are free to drop.